While the Jacksonville Jaguars are not in the market for a quarterback, the quarterback evals are very important to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'll explain what I mean by that on today's edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day, and we always thank you for making us your first listen. I'm the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. My name is Tony Wiggins, and I've covered this Jacksonville Jaguars franchise for over 2 decades now. So I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And you can have an idea of what's going on, too, if you tap into the Locked On Jaguars YouTube page. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit that bell so you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And wherever you listen to your audio podcast, make sure you tap into that location every single day to make sure you don't miss an episode of Locked On Jaguars. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And shout out to the everydayers for joining me every single day. And you can be an everydayer if you join us every single day. All right, we're going to get into the Combine talk this week. The Combine starts this week. And while I sit here in Jacksonville, Florida, I'm contemplating flying up to Indianapolis at some point this week for a couple of days to basically to hang out with my friends. That's what I'm trying to do. But you're going to get Combine coverage anyway, whether I'm there or whether I'm in Jacksonville. So let's just get right to it. I want to talk about the quarterbacks. Why am I talking about quarterbacks when the Jacksonville Jaguars don't need one? At least everyone thinks that except Richard Sherman. So we're going to operate that we're thinking the way everyone else is thinking, that the Jaguars don't need a quarterback because of the presence of Trevor Lawrence. Whether you think he's good or not, the team has every right to be invested in Trevor Lawrence to the point where they're not even evaluating the quarterback positions. And I think they're going to evaluate him, but I don't think they're going to evaluate him in the draft. I think they're going to just evaluate him because, like I always say, when it's time to eval, you do eval. That's what you do. You're not doing anything else. So it'll give them a chance to know and understand that a lot of guys that are scouts and GMs and position coaches, sometimes they end up in other situations down the line. More times than not, that's what's going to happen. And they already know a guys. Like, don't you think that Ryan Nielsen coming here, like you'd like the fact that he knows who Trayvon Walker is, because even though wherever he was, I think he was in New Orleans when Trayvon got picked, they weren't going to be able to pick him, but he knows who he is because he evaluated him, right? So now that he's coming here, he's not starting off just with a blank canvas. He knows exactly what's going on. So we'll hit that up a little bit in the first segment, and we'll carry it over to not needing a quarterback and why it makes this draft even better for the Jacksonville Jaguars, not just stating the obvious. And then last but not least, teams who could call the Jags, whether it's up or down, to try to see if the Jaguars want to swap picks and see if they can make it worth their while. But let's just get back to it and talk about the evaluation of the quarterbacks. I'm going to give you a perfect scenario. And that scenario is last year, the Chicago Bears had the number 1 overall pick, but they were still invested. They got the pick because of the trade that they made with the Carolina Panthers. That allowed the Panthers to come up and take Bryce Young. It also allowed the Bears to obtain DJ Moore, the wide receiver. And the Bears also obtained the first pick in this year's draft, which would have belonged to Carolina, but for the trade. There are some folks that think that the Bears are going to trade Justin Fields now and draft Caleb Williams or somebody, right? That for somehow, and I don't know if that's going to happen, but a year ago, they were still invested in Justin Fields, right? Because they had the number 1 pick and they could have taken CJ Stroud. And none of this would have been a conversation. They might have would have got killed for it back then, but then as things have played out, they wouldn't get killed for it now because a lot of people believe CJ Stroud's the top 7 quarterback in the league, and there's still questions about Justin Fields. but they were invested into their quarterback. And you might think, well, Wig, that was a mistake. Not necessarily. Because while they were still invested in their quarterback, they made a trade that got them a bounty of picks. And now they own the number one pick, and they've seen enough of their quarterback for another year. What if they don't want to move on from Justin Fields? What if that 1 year of evaluation told them, we're going to exercise the fifth year option and keep it for 2 more years? And now we're going to use that pick as leverage, and we're going to move back once, twice, 3 times, and give GM Ryan Poles a smorgasbord of picks in a draft that has really, really good players in it, top to bottom, especially if you're a team that does not need a quarterback. And this is where the Jaguars come in. They're still committed to Trevor Lawrence at a very high level. This allows them potentially in this draft to move around a little bit. I've heard talk that 5 guys may go in the first round. We got the 3 that we know will probably go in the top 10. And then there's this talk about J.J. McCarthy. And then there's this talk about Nix, right? Bo Nix. And I heard even another rumor about Spencer Rattler. And then I heard something about Michael Penix. So that's 7 guys now. That's 7 when you go past the top 3. And what happens with quarterbacks is if 3 of them go really quick, and in some cases 4 of them may go really quick. Those 4 would be Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and J.J. McCarthy. Those are probably the top 4 in everybody's book. But if somebody loves Spencer Rattler, if somebody loves Bo Nix, and you're a team that's sitting there at 12, like the Broncos, 12 or 13, you think one of those guys might fly off. And then what if there's another team that didn't get a quarterback? Like, for instance, if the Patriots take, and they don't do anything in free agency, but if they take like Marvin Harrison Jr., right? And then they want to come back in that second round or trade back up into the first round, that's where it gets interesting for Jacksonville. Because Jacksonville will probably be sitting at the point where teams would want to come up, right? And this is a draft where I believe you're going to get a really, really good starter, even if you're picking pick 45. You're going to get a real, real good starter, right? So this is a draft where the Jaguars could actually hold people hostage and get a lot of stuff for. All right. And we ain't going to be talking about Trent Baalke and whether or not he's capable of doing it. That's conversation I had last week. But for this week, this gives them a lot of flexibility. If there are 5, let's just say the number's 5. If you're picking 12th and there are 5 players that you have no interest in drafting, if you're picking 17th and there are 5 players you have no interest in drafting that'll go before you, right? And what if that number goes up to 6? Well, that means if you take 6 from 17, you have a chance at 17 to get the 11th best player on your board. And what if there are a couple of players in front of them that aren't positions where the Jaguars are prioritizing it? I can't imagine which ones they be, because it seems like outside of quarterback, they probably need a little bit of everything. But what if there's a tight end, which there is, like Brock Bowers? That's another player the Jaguars probably have no interest in drafting. That now moves the Jacksonville Jaguars pick from 11th. They're going to get their 10th best selection. This is why I think it is a good draft for the Jaguars to have a pick, even though they had to lose to get into this position. It's a good draft for them to have a pick, and they don't need a quarterback. I'm going to tell you why not needing a quarterback in this draft could help Jacksonville tremendously, and it's not just about getting the 11th best player. Maybe they move back a little bit, but I'll talk about all of those scenarios in segment 2 in just a second on Locked On Jaguars. First, I want to let you know about FanDuel. That's right, man. FanDuel is the absolute truth, and you guys need to start right now. It didn't end with football, man, because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Now, my silly butt, I forgot how good the Oklahoma City Thunder really are. I'm still thinking these are the old Oklahoma City Thunder. And they're on a winning streak right now. And guess who didn't go for them? But you don't have to make that mistake, because if you look up on FanDuel, they'll give you the information before you make your bets, and you can make an educated bet based on performance that would have told you that Oklahoma is winning right now. Quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sports book partner of the NBA. Segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day, and we always thank you for making us your first listen. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available in the free Fire TV channels app. All right, so we're having a little conversation here, a little monologue, if you will, from me about the draft being a good draft because there are a bunch of players that the Jaguars aren't interested in taking that may fly off the board right ahead of them. What that also does, in my opinion, and this is why not needing a quarterback makes the draft better. Now, by not needing, what I mean is I'm not saying the book is done on Trevor Lawrence. When I say not needing, I mean either he's good enough, he's either a franchise quarterback, good enough for you to continue to take an extended look. You're still optimistic and hopeful because you know what was going on around him, all of those things. The fact is that they're committed to their quarterback, and that's why I used the Bears example last year. They were so committed to Justin Fields that they didn't even look at C.J. Stroud when they had the number 1 pick, right? So that enabled them to get a bounty of draft picks. Well, now if they want to take a quarterback, they can. But if they want to stick with Fields, now they're loaded with a bunch of ammunition that's going to be able to help them continue to build out their team the correct way and maybe give some success down the road. The Jaguars have a similar opportunity. And even though it's not pick number 1, being pick number 17 in a draft where you're looking at anywhere between 4 and 6 guys that may go early in the draft at that position, count in the tight end, Brock Bowers, where the Jaguars probably are not looking to draft someone. And now you start to see that they get a better chance to get a better player. It's a better chance for them not to screw it up if they want to take a person, or it's a better chance for them to get more draft picks and more bites at the apple if they move back. Either way, however you feel about Trent Baalke, giving him an easier selection to make or giving him more chances and more bites at the apple bodes better, in my opinion, than just sitting still and letting things play out. If this were the Jaguars picking 17th and there were maybe 1 or 2 franchise quarterbacks up front, I wouldn't feel as optimistic. But I feel really good because this is a deep draft with high-end talent at multiple positions. Offensive line, wide receiver, cornerback, interior offensive line, tackle, all of those positions. There's some really, really good edge rushers. There's a market if you want an off-the-ball linebacker or a really good safety prospect. If you're sitting right there in the second round, there's going to be somebody that's available. But mainly the wide receiver position, the corners and the interior line, as well as the defensive line. There may be an option for the Jaguars that this is the draft instead of the draft last year. This might be ideal for them to now move back and get more bites of the apple. Now, I know there are some people that might not agree with that. They say, man, just take the best player you absolutely possibly can take. But when you look at the board, they're picking 17th. Under my scenario with Brock Bowers and let's just say 4 quarterbacks, that means they're picking 12th, in my opinion, if you're looking on their board that they may have. Not the overall value board that kind of lets you know, even the overall value board will include players that you know you're not going to take, and whether it be you're already loaded at their position, whether or not it's a scheme difference. For instance, I'll tell you what that's all about. The scheme difference is this. If the Jaguars, if they primarily will focus on guys that play corner, that are man-to-man guys, right? Man-to-man corners. But then there's a dude on the board that excels at zone, and they're not quite sure whether or not that guy can play man-to-man. You might still put him on your overall big board at a certain spot because there are teams that all they do is play zone, and they've done that for decades, and they play a certain way, and they have a higher value on that player than you do based on scheme. So there's what his overall value is, and then you have your own personal board of guys that don't that all match your scheme, that all match your skill set, because scouts love to draft players who are going to do a certain thing. They're not worried about guys that don't do what they don't want them to do, because then that's how you get in bad situations, by drafting dudes based on an overall ranking, but then you're going to bring them in and not ask them to do the things that you want them to do. It was Bill Parcells that said it. I don't worry about what guys don't do because I don't put them on the field to do things that they don't do well. And I'm paraphrasing. He said, I put them out there. They're out there for something specific. Do your job. So with that being said, it really might benefit the Jaguars. Let's just say if the guy that they have 12th on their board and then the guy that they have ranked 15th, if the difference in those two players on the bigger board is this, well, on our bigger board, the guy we have ranked 12th is ranked 19th. And then the guy we have ranked 15th on that bigger board is 33rd, right? And then the next guy that we have on our board, like maybe at 17 or 18, he's ranked 45th on the overall board. What if we can get two of them instead of getting one? How much better is the first player on our board from the 15th player on our board? And especially if they play the same position. What if there's not that much of a difference and we can move down a little bit? And then not only are we going to get the bite of the apple in the second round that we were going to get, but we're going to get one right around that point and we can get an extra player. So that's why it's very, very important that the Jaguars have a pick that's in the middle of the first round in a draft where all of these quarterbacks are going to be prioritized and they don't need one. Because now you can take the option of just taking the higher ranked player, or you can look at the board and see what might be there available for you. How can you help your team in multiple ways? And maybe, just maybe, when you get them in here, the guy who you didn't take doesn't even turn out to be as good as the guy who you actually took, and you got rewarded for it. All of those things are things and stuff that have to be considered when you're looking at the draft. It's like the game within the game. So you can play it easy if you're Jacksonville, and you can say, look, man, I ain't screwing around with that. If the dude I really, really want is there, I'm going to take him. That's an option. And every single time you play the game that way and you do it, if the dude that's sitting there, I'm gonna play. So you'll never be bad off by getting the guy that you want. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. And like I said, that's an option that you can use, and you don't even have to worry about it. But then you can say, you know what? I think the teams that are really, really good at this, those 5 or 6 teams that always seem to push the right buttons, they don't play with scared money. They know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. No, we want another dude here, especially with the fact that you're at least giving up a 3rd round pick for Calvin Ridley. That's already gone at the very least. It could be a 2, but I doubt it. But what if Calvin Ridley hits the market and there are no other viable options and he gets offered an astronomical amount of money? Don't think that it won't happen. It happened last year with Juwan Taylor. Kansas City offered Juwan Taylor way more money than I think anybody else was going to, because they knew who they wanted and they knew what they wanted and they went and got it and they won the Super Bowl. I'm not telling you, I'm not saying Juwan Taylor was solely responsible or had a huge part in that, but I will tell you this: you look at him in the playoffs, and he played way better in the playoffs than he did in the regular season. And the playoffs is why, and a whole bunch of other Chiefs did too, by the way. And the playoffs is why they do it. It's obvious, because you saw the Chiefs in the regular season; they didn't look anything like they looked in the playoffs, and most people didn't think that they were going to win. But guess what happened? Trophy again. Just get them there, and the guys will show up because they build everything towards winning the championship. So the bottom line is, not needing a quarterback makes drafting better, in my opinion, obviously, because 1, if you don't need one, that means you got one. 2, it allows you to move a little bit differently. It allows you to move without the desperation of those teams that actually have to pick a quarterback. And I'm about to get into who those teams might be in a third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you stick around. This show, today's episode, is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is therapy for those that need it, and it's right there available for you whenever you need it. If you're thinking about considering therapy, consider this, man. Most people, a lot of people, including yours truly, I've had instances where I needed therapy and I got it. And once it worked for me, I continued to seek it out each and every time that I had an issue that I tried to overcome, whether it's death in the family, depression by a relative, whatever that could be. Pain management by myself, not feeling like myself. I was able to get out of that rut, man, because I sought out therapy. And now I actually seek out therapy even when I don't think I need it. And you can do the exact same thing. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Learn to take time and make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. And we thank you for making us your first listen. Teams who could call the Jacksonville Jaguars to move up. First, it might require that J.J. McCarthy goes earlier than some people think he will, or that J.J. McCarthy actually does go where a lot of people think he will go, right? And that is in the top 10, right? Those are the top 10 picks that most people are talking about. The wild card here is if he does go in Denver, who is expected to release Russell Wilson. Sean Payton wants him a quarterback. We might need that to happen for Sean Payton to fall in love with either Bo Nix or Spencer Rattler. With all due respect to Michael Penix, I don't think that's Sean Payton is that's where he's going to be. But a lot of this goes back to what if Justin Fields doesn't get traded and they keep him and they move down and somebody else comes up to get Caleb Williams or whoever, right? Minnesota is a team at 11 that might do that. You got to think at some point the Jets are going to start thinking about their quarterback future because Aaron Rodgers is old and has been a little bit fragile lately. Denver, Las Vegas, those are all teams that are sitting in front of Jacksonville, right? So you hope that those teams go ahead and grab and reach out and get a quarterback. You look at the other teams around where Jacksonville is picked. Indy is at 15. They're good. Seattle, they're cool in a way. The Bengals obviously are behind them. The Rams. Pittsburgh, I don't think they're going with another rookie. Miami's okay. Philly is good. Houston is obviously good behind them. Dallas, they're good because they made a trade for Trey Lance, and I think that they believe he is their future. Green Bay is fine. Tampa is the wild card at 26. That's where I'm looking at Tampa, and somebody may say, you know what? Let's move up. If you're talking about teams that are going to go in the first round, it would more likely be Tampa, unless there are teams ahead of Jacksonville that decide to move back, that are way up, that decide to move back and then want to take a bite of the apple in the first round again. But the only team I can imagine in the first round that could come up from 26 to 17 is Jacksonville. And it depends on what they offer Baker Mayfield, okay? Will there be other teams? Some of those teams, that's why I looked at the teams in front and I said the most likely scenario or situation is Washington, New England, the Giants, those teams, Atlanta, that if they don't get a trade, but then they value those second-tier quarterbacks, that's not the top three. If those teams want to come back up into the first round, but now I don't want those teams to think, and I don't want you to think that I'm saying teams like Atlanta that want to take what I call the first round leftovers at quarterback. I'm not telling you that they're going to stay pat and trade their picks to the Jaguars to come up to 17, taking away a first round pick from Jacksonville, even if it means them giving Jacksonville a first round pick the following year. But what I am telling you is a double move. If those teams trade up with someone else, like maybe a team that's in the back of the first round that wants to bail out and get picks, like Detroit. Baltimore has done that in the past. If the 49ers, Kansas City, or if Carolina, who doesn't have a bunch of picks, wants to move back off that first pick of the second round, and those teams get within striking distance, and those teams either make a trade with someone else back up into the back of the first round, and then they have that pick, and now they want to move up to 17 and holler at Jacksonville. Well, that's where I'm talking about. I'm specifically talking about teams that have done a whole bunch of stuff behind the Jaguars, and somehow the Jaguars end up in the back half of that first round and get extra capital that they can use this year in this year's draft, and maybe even possibly move up from their later pick in the second round to come back up towards the middle or the top. So Jacksonville, let's just say they could get player between, instead of their picks that they have now, which is 17 and I believe 48. If they end up with, they keep 48, but if they end up with, instead of 17, let's just say they go to the back and they end up with 28. If you end up with 28 and 56 or 60 or something like that, right? And now you have 28, 48, and then use 56 and some other stuff and come back up to 50 or 49 or maybe 45 or 46. Now you'll have three players between 28, 45, 46, and 48. So now you're really, in my opinion, getting into the meat, what I consider the meat of the draft, and pardon my phone here for ringing. You're getting in what I call the meat of the draft, where you're getting people that were on folks' board as late first round picks to go. And remember this, in terms of need, that 28, if I said 17 was really like 11, that 28 on your board might be 17, and you're right back to where you started when it comes to picking talent with need. And that 48 could be 37, 36, 37. So now you're really, really taking a lot of the guesswork out for the GM that we believe needs a lot of the guesswork taken out. So that's what I mean. Teams who could call the Jaguars to move up, look for any team that is in the top 10 that needs a quarterback, that doesn't get one in free agency, and that doesn't take one in the draft, that wants to think that they may be able to creep back into the first round and get Spencer Rattler or something like that. It'll take them to get a double move, because I do want the Jaguars to end up with a first round pick, because it's extremely important, I think, that they get a guy where they have the fifth-year option on him and they're not doing this again. One of my pet peeves is doing something and having to do it over again, right? If you get a fifth-year option, it buys you more time when it comes to extending people. If you want to take an extra look, see at a guy like they did with Josh Allen, although I don't think it was required with Josh Allen, it's extremely important to arm this team, especially when you believe that there's perceived handicaps in the scouting department. And on the operations side, you got to arm her with more stuff so that the mistakes are compressed a little bit and the chances of success goes up. You guys can be successful every day because you listen to Locked On Jaguars, because I know I'm successful because you listen to Locked On Jaguars. And there's even a chance for you to do even better by paying attention to what Locked On has launched, and that's the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. This is a fire show today, man, because I'm all fired up for the draft. Hopefully I'll go see my buddies up here in Indy. I hope I do, because I want to have some fun too, right? I'm going to discuss this tomorrow. There's coaches that's talking about they're not going to the combine. I've heard this for years about the combine, that the real meat, and I've heard this from a covering side of it too, from the guys that work. Like when I work at these places, that the place to be is the Senior Bowl opposed to the combine. I got a real solution as to why. It's something called pads. Coaches love to be around people that are simulating football, not track and field. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll talk about the combine and the Senior Bowl, the differences, and why it's not that bad of a thing that coaches are saying that they don't want to go. A lot of people may look at it that way. I don't. You guys make sure you take care of each other. We'll see you tomorrow. And as always, thank you for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars.